You were always a placeholder, Selene. A warm body to keep the seat filled until something better came along. Kelric said it without looking at her, his voice as smooth and indifferent as the moonlight spilling across the great hall of Valoria, and the words hit her spine before her mind could catch up. Selene felt the mate bond snap. Not fray. Not loosen. Snap like a tendon torn from bone, a white-hot rupture that started behind her ribs and radiated down every limb until her fingertips went numb and her knees threatened to fold beneath her. She did not fall. She stood at the top of the stone stairs in the shadow of the great arched doorway, one hand pressed flat against the cold granite pillar, and she watched her mate, her king, her husband, before the moon and the pack, press his mouth to the throat of the woman she had once called sister. Marigold. Her best friend since they were pups tumbling through the pine barrens beyond the northern wall. Marigold, who had braided her hair the morning of her mating ceremony. Marigold, whose laugh right now rippled up toward the vaulted ceiling like something bright and cruel. A laugh Selene had heard 10,000 times and never once understood was a blade. Better came along, Kelric repeated, softer now, meant only for the woman in his arms, and Selena watched her own life dissolve in the space of a single breath. She didn't scream. That was the first choice she made, and it would prove to be the one that saved her. Screaming would have summoned the guards, the council, the whole gawking court, and they would have seen the Luna of Valoria break in the doorway of her own home. They would have written it into the pack's memory as the night the weak one wept. Instead, Selene breathed. She counted the beats of a heart that no longer beat in rhythm with anyone's. She let the numbness in her fingers travel up until it reached the place where the bond had been, and she let that place go cold. I will not die here, she told the darkness. I will not become a story you tell, to frighten the obedient. She stepped back into the shadow. The moonlight did not follow her. Down the corridor she went, past the tapestries her hands had chosen, past the portraits of Kelric's father and grandfather, past the little alcove where she had once believed she would someday stand holding a child of her own. Her boots made no sound on the stone. She had learned long ago how to move through this palace like breath through a sleeping body, a skill she had cultivated because a Luna who could not read a room was a Luna soon undone. And Selene had always understood, somewhere beneath her love, that Kelric's affection was a tide and not a foundation. She reached her chambers and closed the door, and did not weep. She stood in the center of the room she had decorated with her own 2 hands, and she looked at the vanity where her mating rings sat in a dish of carved bone, and she thought about how heavy they had felt on her fingers even in the beginning. She thought about the allowance Kelric deposited into the pack treasury under her name each moon, an allowance she had never once fully spent because spending it would have made her dependent, and dependency was a leash. She thought about the small iron box buried beneath the 3rd flagstone in the disused eastern cellar, the box she had been filling for 3 years with coin she earned quietly, trading her knowledge of herb law and border negotiation to merchants who never knew they dealt with a queen. The bond throbbed where it had torn. Phantom pain, the healers would have called it, if she had been foolish enough to ask. A wound where a limb used to be. She pressed her palm to her sternum and pushed the ache down. She took nothing that Kelric had given her. Not the rings, not the silver circlet with its inlaid moonstone, not the fur-lined cloak he had draped over her shoulders on their first winter together, whispering that she was the only warmth he would ever need. She left it all on the bed, arranged neatly, deliberately, a still life of everything she was renouncing. She took only what was hers by her own making, a satchel of dried herbs, a ledger written in a cipher only she could read, a change of travelling clothes in undyed wool, and a hunting knife her own father had forged before the sickness took him. There was a knock. Soft, 3 taps and a pause and one more. The old signal from the kitchens. Bramwell, the steward who had served 3 lunas before her, and who had watched her the way an old wolf watches the horizon, seeing weather before it arrived. She opened the door and he slipped inside, his lined face grim, his hands trembling with something that was not fear, but fury held on a tight leash. "You heard," she said. "The whole lower hall heard, my Luna." He did not trouble to lower his voice. Bramwell's jaw worked. "There are those below who will not stand for it. Say the word and I will—" "No." The word came out steady. "No blood. No division. If the pack tears itself apart over me, then he wins twice." She looked at the old man and felt, for the first time all night, something soft try to rise in her throat. She swallowed it. "You've prepared the eastern gate?" He nodded. "The night patrol answers to my cousin. They'll be watching the western wood when you go. There's a mount saddled at the miller's croft, and the miller's wife will not remember your face by morning." He hesitated. "You've known. For how long have you known this day would come?" "I've known since the first time he called me lucky," Selene said. "Lucky to have been chosen, as though I were a coin he'd found in the road." She lifted the satchel to her shoulder. "A woman only says she's grateful for a gift when she's afraid it will be taken back." Bramwell's eyes shone. "Where will you go?" She thought of the iron box, of the coin, of the network of merchants and midwives and border runners she had built one quiet favor at a time. She thought of the eastern reaches beyond Veloria's authority, the free territories where a wolf was measured by what she could do and not by whose bed she filled. "Somewhere they'll have to learn my name," she said, "before they can throw it away." She embraced the old man once, briefly, the way you embrace a piece of a life you're leaving whole, so it doesn't shatter. Then she went to the eastern cellar, pried up the 3rd flagstone with the tip of her father's knife, and lifted the iron box into the crook of her arm. It was heavier than she remembered. Freedom always was. She walked out of the palace of Valoria through a servant's door as the moon climbed toward its apex, and she did not look back at the great hall where her husband was still murmuring promises into the throat of the woman she had trusted with her whole heart. She would not give them the shape of her leaving to gloat over. Let them wake tomorrow and find the rings on the pillow and the Luna gone, and let them spend the rest of their reign wondering. The mate bond had snapped, but a bond, she was beginning to understand, is only a rope, and a rope can be a leash, or it can be cut, and either way, a wolf who learns to run without it is a wolf no one can ever hold again. The free territories did not welcome her. That was the first lesson, and Selene had expected it, because she had spent her whole life among wolves, and knew that no pack opens its arms to a stranger who arrives at night with a box of coin and a wound she will not name. She came to the trading city of Harrowmere 3 days after she left Valoria, and Harrowmere did not care that she had once been a Luna. Harrowmere cared what she could sell, so she sold what she had. Not the coin that she guarded like a coal in winter. She sold her knowledge. She sat in the back rooms of merchant houses and mediated disputes that had festered for seasons, reading the men across the table the way she had once read the court of Valoria, seeing the fear beneath the bluster, the greed beneath the piety, the small human thing each of them wanted and would not admit to. She untangled a shipping contract that had 2 families on the edge of a blood feud, and she took her fee in silver and shares. She brokered a marriage between rival timber clans that ended a decade of sabotage, and she took her fee in a percentage of the lumber that flowed downriver ever after. Within a moon, she had a room above a cartographer's shop. Within 2, she had a name that meant something in the counting houses. The Grey Advisor, they called her, for the undyed wool she still wore and the calm grey of her eyes that never once betrayed what she was thinking. Within 3, she had partners and enemies, and the first true friend she had made since the night the bond broke. His name was Torvald Ash, and he was not a wolf at all, but a bare-blooded shifter from the mountain clans, broad as a doorway and slow to speak, who ran the largest freight consortium in the eastern reaches, and who had come to Selena to settle a dispute and stayed to become her strongest ally. He respected her, and it took her a long time to understand that the strange lightness she felt in his presence was simply what it was to be respected without being owned. He never once asked what she had been before Harrowmere. He asked only what she could do, and when she showed him, he built with her. "You negotiate like someone who's already lost everything," he told her one evening, over a shared meal of riverfish and black bread in the office they now shared. "There's no fear in you. Men can't threaten you because you've already survived the worst thing you can imagine." She almost told him then. She almost said the name Kelric, almost let the whole wound spill open. But she had learned the value of a sealed vault, and she only said, "Fear is a currency." I stopped spending it. The intelligence came slowly at first, then all at once, the way weather does. Merchants who travelled the western routes brought news of Valoria, and the news was not good. The pack's borders were fraying. Kelric, they said, had grown erratic, quick to anger, slow to judgment, spending the treasury on feasts and vanities. His new Luna, the woman Marigold, wore silk and jewels, and knew nothing of governance, and the council chafed under her ignorance, while the common wolves went hungry through a hard winter, that Selene, had she still been there, would have prepared for a full season in advance. Selena listened to it all with a face like still water. She did not smile. She did not send a raven to gloat. She simply filed each report away in the cipher ledger she still kept, and she began, very quietly, to buy. She bought Vialoria's debt. It was Torvald who taught her the shape of the thing, though he did not know what she was building. Valoria, like every pack that lived beyond its means, borrowed against its future, against the harvest, against the ore in its hills, against the tolls on its roads. It borrowed from merchant consortiums and mountain clans and the great banking houses of the free cities, and those debts were bought and sold like any other commodity by people who cared nothing for the moon or the bond or the ancient pride of wolves. Selene, with her stashed coin, now grown fat on 3 seasons of shrewd investment, began to purchase those debts. A note here, a lien there, always through intermediaries, always beneath the notice of a king too busy feasting to read his own ledgers. "You're spreading yourself thin on some backwater pack," Torvald observed one night, frowning at the accounts. "Valoria's a bad bet. That king of theirs is running it into the ground." "I know," Selene said. "That's why I'm buying." He looked at her a long moment, and something in his shrewd bear's eyes shifted. "This is personal." She did not lie to him. "It's owed." He nodded slowly and never asked again, and that was when she understood she trusted him, not because he demanded her secrets, but because he did not. 6 months after the night the bond broke, Selene stood on the roof of the cartographer's shop in Harrowmere and watched the sun come up over the eastern reaches, and she took stock of the woman she had become. Her hands, which had once trembled against a granite pillar, were steady. Her name, which Kelric had called a placeholder, was spoken with respect in a dozen counting-houses. Her coin, which had begun as a coal she guarded in the dark, had become a fire that warmed a growing empire of shares and liens and quiet obligations. And in her sealed vault of a heart, the phantom pain of the broken bond had cooled into something harder and more useful. Not hatred. Hatred was a fire that burned the one who carried it. What Selene carried was colder, a clarity, a purpose, a certainty. She was going to walk back into Valoria one day, not as a supplicant and not as a wraith of the past, but as the single largest creditor of a kingdom on the edge of ruin. And she was going to make her husband, and the woman he chose over her, understand exactly what they had thrown away. But not yet. The wise hunter does not spring the trap while the prey is still strong enough to chew off its own leg. She would wait. She would build. She would let Kelric's rot spread to its natural end. And she would be there, calm and grey-eyed and utterly unbreakable, when the whole gilded structure came down. "You're smiling," Torvald said, joining her on the roof with 2 cups of bitter mountain tea. "I don't think I've ever seen you smile." "I'm not smiling," Selene said, and took the tea. "I'm remembering how to." The winter that broke Valoria was not the cruelest anyone could remember. That was the tragedy of it, the thing the old wolves would speak of for a generation. The winter was hard but ordinary, the kind of winter a competent Luna prepares for the previous spring by ordering the granaries filled and the salt meat cured, and the herb stores counted against the fever that always came with the cold. Selene had done exactly that, every year, without a word of thanks. The pack had never known how close to the edge they walked, because she had spent her life quietly stepping between them and the cliff. Now no one stepped. Kelric had never learned the arithmetic of survival, because he had never had to. He was a king who understood dominance, the challenge in the ring, the throat offered in submission, the raw physical fact of being the strongest wolf on the mountain. He could not be beaten in single combat, and so he believed, in the marrow of him, that being unbeaten was the same as being right. He did not understand that a kingdom is not a duel. A kingdom is a ledger, and the ledger does not care how sharp your teeth are. So when the fever came with the cold, there were no herb stores, because Marigold had thought the herb women dull and dismissed them from the court. When the granaries emptied by midwinter, there was no salt meat, because the coin that should have bought it had been spent on a summer of feasts and a set of jewelled collars for the new Luna and her retinue of hangers-on. When the council came to Kelric with reports of hunger in the outer holdings, he did what strong men do when confronted with problems they cannot punch. He grew angry, and he blamed. He blamed the merchants for their prices. He blamed the council for their weakness. He blamed the harsh moon and the thin game and the old families who muttered against him. He blamed, in his darkest and most honest moments, alone in the great hall, where he had once broken his wife's heart without troubling to lower his voice, the ghost of the woman who had left, because Valoria remembered Selene now. It remembered her the way a body remembers a limb it has lost. The old steward, Bramwell, who had stayed because someone had to, because the common wolves needed a friend at court, and he had promised her nothing less, watched the king's face on the nights the reports came in, and he saw the thing take root there. The realization, not yet the full understanding, but the first cold seed of it. "There was a time," Bramwell said carefully one night, because he was old and had earned the right to speak plainly, "when the granaries were always full by autumn's end, and no one asked how, when the fevers were caught early, and the herb women were kept close and honoured. You were a fortunate king in those years." "I'm aware I had a competent Luna," Kaelric snapped. "She left. She abandoned her pack in the night like a thief." "Did she?" Bramwell said. It was not a question, and the old man let the silence after it stretch until the king looked away. Marigold, for her part, was drowning and did not know how to swim. She had wanted the throne, wanted the silks and the deference, and the man who was the strongest wolf on the mountain, and she had believed, because Selene had always made it look so easy, that being Luna was a matter of wearing the circlet well. She discovered too late that the circlet was the least of it. The council came to her with questions she could not answer. The women of the outer holdings came to her with children burning with fever, and she had no herbs to give them, and no words either, because Selene had known every family by name, and Marigold knew no one's name but her own. She had thought that taking Selene's place would mean becoming Selene. She learned that a place is not a person. She could sit in the chair. She could not fill it. And the pack, who had loved their quiet grey Luna without ever quite saying so, made their judgment in 1,000 small silences. The averted eyes, the perfunctory bows, the way conversation died when she entered a room and resumed, colder when she left. The bond between Marigold and Kaelric, forged in betrayal, curdled quickly. He had wanted her because she was new, because she was uncomplicated, because she laughed and did not look at him with the quiet, assessing patience that had always made him feel, obscurely, that he was being measured and found wanting. But a kingdom in crisis is nothing but complication, and Marigold's laughter dried up when the coin did, and soon Kaelric found himself yoked to a woman who could not help him and would not comfort him, and blamed him, in her turn, for a throne that had turned to ashes in her hands. They fought. The whole palace heard it now, the way the whole palace had once heard him call his wife a placeholder. There was a symmetry to it that Bramwell noted with grim satisfaction and kept to himself. Meanwhile, in Harrowmere, the notes and liens and debts flowed quietly into the vault of a merchant company called Grey Meridian, whose principal owner never gave her name and whose dealings were handled through a broad, slow-spoken, bare-blooded shifter named Torvald Ashe. By late winter, Grey Meridian held the majority of Veloria's sovereign debt, though not a soul in the Mountain Kingdom knew it. The notes had been gathered patiently, one at a time, through so many intermediaries that no single banker in the Free Cities could have traced the whole web back to its center. Selene had learned this too from Torvald, that true power hides its shape, that the hand which controls a thing is most dangerous when no one knows the hand exists. She spread the ledger before her one grey afternoon and read the sum of it, and felt the cold clarity settle over her like a well-worn cloak. She owned the tolls on Veloria's roads for the next 12 years. She owned the lien on the ore in the northern hills. She owned the debt against 3 harvests not yet grown. If she called even a fraction of it due, the kingdom would default, and a kingdom that defaults to a private creditor forfeits the collateral, and the collateral was everything Kaelric believed was his by right of teeth and blood. "You could take it all tomorrow," Torvald said. He had guessed the shape of things by now, though he still did not know the name that lived behind her silence. "Call the notes, seize the collateral, and let their strong king learn what strength is worth against a signed page." "I could," Selene agreed, "and he would call it theft. He would stand in his great hall and roar about honor and the moon and the ancient rights of wolves, and the pack hungry as they are, betrayed as they are, might just rally to him one last time, because a wolf will defend its own against an outsider, even when its own has failed it. She closed the ledger. No, I won't take it. I'll make him give it to me. On his knees, with his own mouth, in front of the council he's failed, and the pack he's starved. I want them to see him hand it over freely, because that's the only way they'll believe he never deserved it. Torvald studied her, the way he studied a difficult freight manifest, looking for the load-bearing line. And how do you make a proud king kneel of his own will? You wait until kneeling is the only thing left that isn't dying, she said, and then you offer him a way to survive it. The way came in the form of an invitation, which is to say, a summons, which is to say, a desperate creditor's request dressed in the last rags of royal dignity. Kelric could not pay his debts. The winter had emptied him, and spring would not fill him fast enough, and the free city bankers who had once lent so freely now looked at Valoria the way vultures look at a stumbling elk. A delegation from the Mountain Kingdom rode east to Harrowmere to seek terms from the merchant company that had, mysteriously, come to hold so many of the notes, a company called Grey Meridian, whose reputation for fairness was matched only by its reputation for granting audiences to no one. Kelric came himself. That surprised even Selene, though it should not have. Pride would not let him send a proxy to beg. If there was begging to be done, he would do it in person and call it negotiation, and dominate the room by the sheer force of his presence, the way he had dominated every room since he was old enough to fight. He rode into Harrowmere with a retinue of 6 and Marigold at his side, because he could not be seen to have left her behind, and because she had insisted, believing that the sight of a Luna in her silks would remind these grubbing merchants who they were dealing with. They were shown to the great receiving hall of Grey Meridian, a long room of dark timber and cold stone, tall windows letting in the flat grey light of the eastern winter, and at the far end a single chair turned away from the door to face the fire. A high-backed chair of grey oak, plain and heavy, its occupant hidden. Bramwell had come too. Selene had arranged that, through her network, a message threaded so carefully that the old steward had known to attach himself to the delegation, had known. The moment he heard the name, Grey Meridian, and the word grey attached to an advisor no one could describe, exactly whose trap the king was walking into. He stood now among the retinue, with his old heart hammering and his face a careful mask, and he waited. "I am King Kelric of Valoria," the king announced to the back of the chair, filling the room with his voice the way he filled every space. "And I have ridden 3 days to speak with the master of this house. I'll not address the back of a chair like a petitioner. Turn and face me." The chair did not move. "We hold your notes, King Kelric," said a voice from the chair, and it was low and even and utterly without deference. A woman's voice. "All of them, near enough. The roads, the ore, the harvests. If I call them due this afternoon, you ride home to a kingdom that no longer belongs to you by dawn. So I would reconsider the tone. Petitioners who owe everything do not give commands to the people they owe." Selena watched him in the reflection of the tall, dark window, watched the fury bloom in his face, and then check itself as the arithmetic of his situation reasserted its cold grip. She had wondered whether he would recognize the voice. He did not. 6 months and a broken bond, and a heart that had never truly listened to her, had rendered her a stranger by sound alone. "Then let us speak plainly," Kelric said, mastering himself with visible effort. "Merchant to king, I need terms. Time. The winter was hard. The winter was ordinary, the voice cut in. The failure was not the winter's. Marigold's laugh, that bright, cruel thing, chimed nervously into the silence. How would a counting-house woman know the first thing about a hard mountain winter? We came for terms, not for a lecture from someone hiding behind furniture. And that was when the chair turned. It turned slowly, the grey oak scraping soft against the stone, and Selena let them see her by degrees. The undyed wool, the calm grey eyes, the steady hands folded in her lap, and the face they both knew and had both spent 6 months trying to forget. She watched the recognition hit them, the way the bond break had hit her. Not a fraying, but a snapping, a rupture, the blood draining from Marigold's painted face and the breath stopping in Kelrick's chest. "Hello, Kelrick," Selena said. "Hello, Marigold. I hear the granaries were empty this year." For a moment, no one in the hall breathed. Bramwell at the back pressed his lips together and looked at the floor to hide what was rising in his old eyes. "Selene." Kelrick's voice came out wrong, cracked at the edges. "You. This is you. Grey Meridian is you." "Grey Meridian is a company," she said. "I am merely its largest shareholder, and its final authority, and the woman who spent the last 6 months buying every debt your incompetence generated." She rose from the chair, unhurried, and the plain grey wool moved around her like the robes of a judge. "You called me a placeholder, a warm body keeping the seat filled until something better came along. Do you remember? You didn't trouble to lower your voice. I was—" He stopped. There was no end to that sentence that would survive contact with this room. "You were drunk on a woman who laughed prettily and asked nothing hard of you," Selene finished for him. "I understand. It's a comfortable thing to be worshipped instead of measured. But worship doesn't fill a granary, and it turns out neither does the strongest set of teeth on the mountain." Marigold had recovered enough to gather her silks and her indignation. "You think this makes you something?" she hissed. "You bought some paper. You'll always be the woman he left. That doesn't change no matter how many merchants call you clever." Selene turned her grey eyes on the woman who had braided her hair the morning of her mating ceremony, and she didn't raise her voice, and that was what made it terrible. "You're right," she said. "I'll always be the woman he left, and you'll always be the woman he left her for, the one who was better, until the coin ran out and the fevers came, and the pack looked at you and saw nothing they could love. Tell me, Marigold, when they came to you with their dying children and no herbs to give them, did you laugh then? That pretty laugh? Or did you finally understand what the seat was for?" Marigold had no answer. Her mouth opened and closed, and the bright cruelty in her drained away into something small and frightened, and Kelrick, for the first time, looked at her and saw the hollowness that Selene had named, and understood that he had traded a foundation for a tide, and the tide had gone out. "That doesn't work on me anymore," Selene added quietly, when Marigold drew breath to strike again. "None of it does. Not your laugh, not his commands, not the memory of a life I've already buried. You'll have to find some other woman to make small. I'm done being your mirror." Kelrick stepped forward, and the old dominance rose in him out of pure animal reflex, his shoulders squaring, his voice dropping into the register that had made stronger wolves than him lower their eyes. "Selene, whatever grievance you carry, we can settle it as adults, as two people who once shared a bond. Name your price. I'll pay it. But do not destroy a kingdom of innocent wolves to punish one man's mistake." And there it was, the last card of a cornered king, the appeal to the very people he had starved. Selene had known he would play it. She had planned for it. "The innocent wolves," she repeated, "the ones freezing in the outer holdings while you bought jeweled collars. Those innocent wolves. You want me to spare them." She let the silence work. "I intend to. That was always the plan. But not for your sake, Kelric. Never again for your sake." She walked to the long table where the terms had been laid out that morning, and she set one hand upon the topmost page, and she looked at the king who had once called her lucky to have been chosen. "Here is what happens now," she said. "You will sit," Selene said, "and you will listen, and when I am finished, you will understand that I am not offering you a negotiation. I am offering you the only door out of a burning house, and the price of the door is your pride, which I have found is worth considerably less than you always believed." Keilric did not sit. Not yet. Pride is a thing that dies in stages, and the first stage is the refusal to admit it is dying. He stood at the head of the long, dark table with his hands curled into fists at his sides, and Selene watched the war behind his eyes. The strong wolf who wanted to overturn the table and roar, straining against the cornered king who knew that a single word from her would send him home to a throne room full of strangers. "Sit," Torvald rumbled from the doorway, and the sheer mass of him filled the frame like a boulder that had learned to speak. The lady asked once, "She's more patient than I am." Kelric sat. Selene did not gloat. That was the thing Bramwell would remember longest, the thing he would carry back to Veloria and speak of in the kitchens for the rest of his days, that in the moment of her absolute victory, she did not smile, did not sneer, did not raise her voice by a single degree. She simply began to speak, and her calm was more devastating than any triumph could have been, because it told everyone in the room that this was not the wild joy of revenge. This was the settled work of justice, and justice doesn't celebrate. It simply arrives. "Grey Meridian will forgive Violoria's debt," she said. "All of it. The roads, the ore, the harvests. The kingdom will emerge from this winter solvent and whole, and no innocent wolf will freeze because a merchant company called a note due in spring." Marigold's head came up, hope flickering, and Kelric's fists loosened a fraction, and Selene let them believe it was mercy for exactly the length of one breath before she closed the trap. "On 3 conditions," she said. "The first is that Veloria will be governed henceforth by a council of stewards, elders and holders answerable to a charter I have already drafted. The crown will remain. The pack loves its traditions, and I will not strip them of a comfort that costs me nothing. But the crown will sign the charter, and the charter binds the treasury, the granaries, and the herb stores to the council's oversight in perpetuity. Never again will a single wolf's vanity be permitted to starve a kingdom." "You'd make me a figurehead," Keilric said, and his voice had gone hoarse. "I'd make you accountable," Selene corrected. "There is a difference, though I understand it may be difficult for you to see it, having never been accountable to anyone in your life." She turned a page. "The second condition. Bramwell, steward of Veloria, will sit at the head of that council, with the authority to summon or dismiss any officer of the court, including the crown's own retinue. He has served 4 lunars and kept the lower halls fed through 3 famines you never noticed. The pack trusts him. That trust is worth more than your bloodline, and I intend to spend it wisely." At the back of the hall, Bramwell went very still, and then very slowly he straightened, decades falling from his shoulders, and he inclined his head to her. Not a bow of submission, but the salute of one old campaigner to another. And the third, Selene continued, and here at last something shifted in her voice, something that had been sealed in the vault of her for 6 long months. The third condition is Marigold. The woman flinched at her own name. You wanted to be Luna, Selene said, looking at her steadily. You wanted the silks, and the deference, and the seat by the strongest wolf on the mountain. Well, you had it. For 6 months you had exactly what you took from me, and I have watched from a distance while it turned to ashes in your hands, and I find that I am not angry any more. I thought I would be. I thought this moment would taste of blood. But you are a small woman who wanted a large thing, and you got it, and it broke you, and there is no punishment I could invent that would be crueler than the 6 months you have already lived. She paused. So here is your condition. You will leave Veloria. Not in disgrace, not in chains. I won't parade you. You'll be given a stipend, modest and sufficient, and a house in one of the free holdings, and you will live out your life as what you always were beneath the silk, an ordinary woman who reached above her measure and fell. Go somewhere no one has heard your name, Marigold, and build a small life honestly, and perhaps you'll find it fits you better than the throne ever did. It was mercy, and it landed like a sentence, because it was mercy delivered by the woman she had wronged, and there is nothing more unbearable to a proud heart than being forgiven by the person you were sure you had defeated. Marigold's painted face crumpled. She looked at Kelric. One last time, the reflex of a woman reaching for the strong wolf who was supposed to protect her. And Kelric didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on Selene, and in them was the full and terrible dawning that Selene had promised herself she would live to see. The understanding, at last and too late, of exactly what he had thrown away. I signed my life to you, he said, very quietly, and it was not a command now, and it was not an argument. It was a man speaking from the bottom of a well he had dug himself, before the moon and the pack, and I broke it for a laugh, for the feeling of being adored instead of seen. I called you a placeholder. He shook his head slowly. You were the whole foundation. I was standing on you the entire time, and I called you the thing that could be replaced. Yes, Selene said. She did not soften it. Some truths are owed their full weight. You did. Can it be undone? He asked, and there it was, the last and most human thing, the hope, absurd and heartbreaking, that the door he had burned might yet be opened, that a bond snapped in a moonlit hall might yet be mended, if he only found the right coin to pay. The bond. Us. If I gave up everything, if I signed your charter and knelt in the square and told the whole pack I was a fool, would you? No, Selene said. Just the one word. She let it stand alone because it needed no reinforcement, and because she had learned that the wronged party speaks least and lands hardest. No, she said again, more gently, and the gentleness was the cruelest part. There is no coin for that, Kelric. There is no clever page I can sign. You didn't break a contract. You broke a woman, and she healed into someone who does not need you, and the woman you're asking to come back doesn't exist anymore. I buried her in the eastern reaches under a name you never bothered to learn to respect. What's sitting in this chair is what grew up out of that grave, and she is not for you. She is not for anyone who thinks a person can be a placeholder. She held his gaze. You may keep your crown, you may keep your title and your traditions and your seat in the great hall, but you will kneel not to me, and not for love, and not to earn back a bond that's ash. You'll kneel to sign the charter in the square, before the pack, the way you asked, because it's the only way they'll believe the change is real. And then you'll rule Valoria as a servant of it, the way you should have from the beginning. That is the door. That is the only door. Sign or walk out that gate and ride home to watch it all default and die. The fire cracked and settled in the grate. Grey light lay flat across the dark timber. Somewhere below in the counting rooms of Grey Meridian, a bell rang out the hour, and its clear note fell into the silence of the hall like a stone into still water. Kelric looked down at the charter. He was a strong wolf, the strongest on the mountain, and no one had ever forced him to do anything in his life that his own strength could prevent. But strength, he had finally learned, was the wrong tool for the shape of this problem, and there was nothing in his great frame, or his sharp teeth, or his roaring voice that could change a single word on the page in front of him. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, the first time Selene had ever seen him tremble at anything. And he signed. The scratch of the nib was the loudest sound in the world. When it was done, he set the pen down with exaggerated care, as a drunk man sets down a glass, and he stood, and before Selene could say another word, before the terms called for it, before anyone in the hall expected it, Kelric of Valoria, king of the mountain, went down on one knee on the cold stone floor of a merchant house and bowed his head to the woman he had called a placeholder. "I'm sorry," he said. It was not a negotiation. It was not a strategy. It was, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, simply the truth. "For what it's worth, which I know is nothing. I'm sorry, Selene. You deserved a king who could see you. I wasn't him." Selene looked down at the bowed head of the man whose bond had once been the whole architecture of her life, and she waited for the triumph to come, the hot rush of vindication she had imagined 1,000 times in the dark of her room above the cartographer's shop. It did not come. What came instead was quieter and stranger, and, she understood, far more valuable. A kind of release, the final loosening of a rope that had bound her long after it snapped. She had thought she needed him on his knees. She discovered, watching him there, that she had needed only to stop needing him at all, and that this kneeling king, this signed page, this room full of witnesses, was simply the ceremony by which she let herself finally believe it. "Get up," she said, not unkindly. "Kneeling doesn't suit you, and it was never what I wanted." He rose slowly, uncertain, a man who had run out of moves and did not know how to stand in a room he could not dominate. Marigold had drifted toward the door, forgotten by everyone, including herself, a decorative thing whose external power had finally, fully, exited the room, and no one marked her going but Bramwell, who watched her disappear down the stair with an expression of something too tired to be satisfaction. "There will be papers," Selene said, businesslike now, the grey advisor once more. "Bramwell has the authority to execute the charter on the pack's behalf. Torvald will handle the debt forgiveness through the company. You'll ride home a king still, Kelric, but a smaller one. And if you're wise, and I've never known you to be, but people surprise me sometimes, you'll find that a smaller crown sits easier than a large one you were never fit to carry." She gathered the signed charter, rolled it, and handed it to Bramwell, whose hands closed around it like a man receiving something holy. "Go home. Feed your people. Learn their names. It's not too late for that part, even if it's too late for everything else." Kelric hesitated at the threshold. "The company. Grey Meridian. You built it in 6 months. From nothing. From coin I earned and hid while you were busy not seeing me," Selene said. You gave me an allowance for 3 years, and I never spent a copper of it, because I always knew, somewhere beneath the loving, that a woman who lets herself be kept is a woman who can be discarded. You taught me that, in a way. You should be proud. I was your best student." He left without another word, because there were no words left that would not shame him further, and Bramwell lingered a moment in the emptying hall. "You could have burned it all down," the old steward said. "You had every right. I'd have handed you the torch myself." "I know," Selene said, "but the pack didn't wrong me." "He did. And burning a kingdom to punish one man is exactly the kind of arithmetic he'd have done, mistaking his own wound for the center of the world." She almost smiled. "Besides, I find I'd rather own the thing that discarded me than destroy it. It's a better revenge. Every good harvest Valoria brings in from now on, every fed child and full granary, will be because a woman he called worthless built the system that keeps them alive. Let that be my monument. It'll outlast his crown." Bramwell bowed to her then, fully, the deep bow of a servant to his sovereign, and she let him, because it was not for her vanity, but for his heart. And some kindnesses are owed to the people who never abandoned you. 6 months became a year, and a year became 3. And the eastern reaches learned to speak the name of Grey Meridian the way other lands spoke the names of ancient banking houses, with respect edged in a little fear. Selene expanded the company from freight and debt into shipping, into ore, into the great, slow business of building the infrastructure that let free peoples trade without kneeling to any king. Torvald remained at her side, and somewhere in the long grey afternoons of ledgers and negotiations, the respect between them had deepened into something neither of them named too quickly, because they had both learned the cost of naming a thing before it had proven itself. He never asked her to be smaller. She never asked him to be anything but what he was. It was, she thought, what a bond was supposed to be all along. Not a rope that held you, but 2 wolves choosing, each dawn, to run in the same direction. Valoria did not collapse. That was the part that surprised the merchants who had bet against it. Under Bramwell's counsel, the granaries filled again, the herb women returned to honor, and the outer holdings which had frozen and starved, warmed and fed. Kelric ruled on, a diminished king, and the reports that reached Selene through her network suggested that diminishment had, improbably, made a better man of him, that he had begun to learn the names, to walk the outer holdings, to sit in council and listen more than he roared. Whether it was true repentance or merely the survival instinct of a wolf with nowhere left to run, Selene didn't much care. The result was the same, a fed kingdom, run by people who answered to it, her monument, standing. She never went back. There was no need. The woman who had fled through a servant's door in the dark had wanted, once, to walk back into that great hall in triumph, and she had done a version of that in the receiving room of Grey Meridian, and she had discovered that triumph was smaller and quieter than she'd dreamed, and that was fine. The dream had gotten her out. It had done its work. She did not need to keep chewing on a bone she'd already cracked for its marrow. On a grey evening, 3 years after the night the bond broke, Selene stood again on the roof of a building, a taller one now, the great grey tower of Grey Meridian's headquarters, overlooking the sprawl of Harrowmere and the eastern roads that ran gold with the traffic of her making, and Torvald came up beside her with 2 cups of bitter mountain tea, the way he always had. "There's a wolf in the lobby asking for the Grey advisor," he said. "Old fellow. Says his name is Bramwell. Says he's retiring and wanted to see you once more before he did." Selena's throat tightened, and she let it. She had learned in these years that the sealed vault of her heart could be opened for the right people, and that opening it didn't make her weak, it made her whole. "Bring him up," she said, "and bring a third cup. He takes his tea sweet, always sneaking honey when the last Luna wasn't looking." Torvald smiled, that slow, rare smile she had come to treasure, and went to fetch the old man. And Selena turned back to the roofs and the roads and the last grey light of the day. She thought about the woman she had been, standing frozen against a granite pillar, while the man she loved called her a warm body, keeping a seat filled. She thought about the numbness in her fingers and the snap of the bond and the single vow she had made to the darkness, that she would not die there, that she would not become a story told to frighten the obedient. She had kept it. She had become, instead, the story told to remind the underestimated what they were capable of. She had built a life, not on a bond that could be broken by a prettier laugh, but on her own 2 hands and her own clear mind, and the quiet coal of worth she had guarded through the coldest winter of her life, until it grew into a fire that warmed 100,000 strangers. Kaelric had thought her worth was something he had granted her, that she was lucky to have been chosen, a placeholder elevated by his favor, holding a seat until something better arrived. He had been wrong about the most important thing a person can be wrong about. Worth is not granted by those in power. It is not a coin pressed into your palm by a king to be taken back when he tires of you. It is proven in the dark, alone, through the long, unglamorous grind of surviving what should have destroyed you. And once it is proven, it can never again be given or revoked by anyone but you. That is the terrible and beautiful truth the discarded learn, that the powerful never have to. That a bond someone else can break was never the thing holding you up. You were always holding yourself. You simply hadn't been forced to find out until they let go. The door to the roof opened behind her, and there was Bramwell, older and stooped, but with his eyes still bright, and the sight of him, this one loyal witness who had seen her clearly when the whole court had looked past her, undid something in her chest that no ledger ever could. She crossed the roof and embraced him, and this time she did not hold back the softness, because she had earned the right to feel it, and there was no one left she needed to be hard in front of. "Look at you," Bramwell said, holding her at arm's length, his old voice thick. "Look what you built out of nothing but a box of coin and a broken heart." "It wasn't nothing," Selene said. "It was everything I had left. That turns out to be a great deal, when you finally stop giving it away to people who don't deserve it." They drank their tea as the light failed, the 3 of them, and Harrowmere lit its 1,000 lamps below, and somewhere far to the west, a mountain kingdom she had saved, without loving, fed its people under a chastened king. And Selene, who had once been a placeholder, who had once been discarded in a moonlit hall by the strongest wolf on the mountain, stood in the tower she had built and understood that she had won, not loudly, not with blood, but in the only way that lasts. She had won by becoming a woman who could never be discarded again, because she no longer belonged to anyone but herself. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt that snap of the bond in your own chest, or that slow, cold clarity of a person deciding they will never again beg to be seen, then I want you to sit with that feeling for just a moment before you let it go, because it belongs to you and not to me. That ache you felt watching Selene stand frozen against the granite pillar, that quiet fire you felt as she pried up the 3rd flagstone and lifted her freedom into the crook of her arm. That is not fiction. That is recognition. Somewhere in you is a version of the moment she lived. A room where someone you trusted made you small, a night you chose silence over screaming, a door you walked through with nothing but the coal of your own worth guarded in the dark. And if you have not yet walked through that door, perhaps this is the reminder you needed, that the door exists, and that the woman who walks through it doesn't stay diminished forever. So if Selene's story moved you, do the small thing that tells this channel to keep telling stories like hers. Tap that like button. It costs you nothing, and it tells me that the tale of a discarded woman who built an empire out of a broken bond found the people it was meant to find. Share this video with someone in your life who needs it. You know who they are. The friend who keeps shrinking themselves to fit inside someone else's tide. The sister who calls herself lucky to be chosen when she should be the one doing the choosing. The person staring at their own moonlit hall right now, wondering whether they have the strength to leave with dignity and rebuild in silence. Send it to them, not as a lecture, but as a hand on the shoulder that says, I see you, and you are the foundation, not the placeholder. And if you want more stories like this one, more slow burn justice, more quiet triumph served cold, more underestimated people rising to reclaim what was always theirs, then subscribe and stay with me. Because this is a community that celebrates the ones who refused to break, and I have a great many more of their stories to tell. But before you go, I want to leave you standing on that grey rooftop with Selene a moment longer, because there is one more thing worth carrying away from her, and it is not the empire, and it is not the kneeling king, and it is not even the sweetness of Bramwell sneaking honey into his tea while the years fell from his shoulders. It is the thing she said to him as the lamps of Harrowmere came alive below them, the thing she almost did not say because it sounded, even to her, like something too simple to be true after everything. I used to think the cruelest part was that he stopped loving me, she told the old steward, cupping the warmth of the tea in both her steady hands. I would lie awake in that room above the cartographer's shop and turn it over and over. What I could have done, what I could have been, what prettier laugh I might have learned to keep him, as if his love were a wall I had failed to hold up, as if the whole structure of my life was something I had let collapse. She watched the last light go copper, and then grey, and then gone. It took me the better part of a year to understand that I had it exactly backward. His love was never the wall. It was a curtain hung over a window, and I had spent so long admiring the pattern on it that I never once looked at the view behind it. When he tore it down, I thought he had exposed me to the cold, but he had only shown me the sky. Bramwell said nothing, because he was old enough to know when a woman is speaking to herself through you, and Torvald stood a little apart with his broad shoulders against the parapet, letting her have the words, because that too was a kind of love, the kind that does not need to fill every silence with itself. They will tell you, Selene went on, quieter now, that the strongest thing you can do is fight to keep what someone is taking from you, to hold the bond, to mend the break, to win them back. And there is a time for fighting. I won't pretend there isn't. But the strongest thing I ever did was let him keep his prize and walk away from the table. Because the moment I stopped trying to be chosen, I became something that could not be unchosen. The moment I stopped begging to be seen, I became impossible not to see. She turned from the darkening city and looked at the two people on that rooftop who had earned the whole open vault of her heart. That is the secret the powerful never learn, because they never have to. They think worth flows down from them like water from a height, that they grant it and revoke it and dole it out in allowances. And so they are always undone by the ones they discarded, because the discarded are the only people alive who have been forced to find out where worth actually comes from. She set down the empty cup. Below them, the roads ran gold into the dark, carrying the freight of a life she had built from a box of coin and a snapped tendon of a bond. And to the west, a kingdom she had spared, slept warm under a smaller king, and none of it. Not one lamp, not one full granary, not one fed child in the outer holdings had been granted to her by anyone. She had proven it. She had built it. She had reclaimed it, every last stone, on her own terms and in her own name, and no man with the strongest teeth on any mountain could ever again press a coin into her palm and call it her worth. "Come inside," she said to them both, and there was warmth in it now, the rare earned warmth that lands hardest because it is scarce. "The tea's gone cold and Bramwell's shivering, and I have a thing or two left to build before I'm done." And Torvald pushed off the parapet with that slow, rare smile, and Bramwell wrapped his old hands tighter around his sweetened cup, and the three of them went down into the great grey tower she had raised out of nothing, out of everything, out of a single vow made to the darkness on the worst night of her life, that she would not die there, and that she would not become a story told to frighten the obedient. She had kept it. She had become, instead, the story you just heard. And now it belongs to you.